The air inside the courtroom was too still, like even the walls were holding their breath. Outside, the wind ticked softly against the old windows of the Vermont courthouse. But inside, everything was silent, unnaturally so. Not because the case had started yet, but because everyone was waiting. At the front of the courtroom, past rows of oak benches and tired-looking lawyers, sat a little girl on the witness stand. Her name was Sienna. She was 8 years old, barely tall enough for her feet to swing above the floor. She wore a light blue sweater with faded butterflies stitched along the sleeves, the kind of sweater a child wears when she wants to feel safe. Her hands clutched the edge of the seat, like it was the only thing anchoring her to this world. She hadn't said a single word. Not today, not yesterday, not for the last 729 days. Not since the day her world went quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because once when she did speak, no one believed her. Or worse, someone punished her for it. Across the courtroom, her mother sat with their attorney tissues crumpled in both fists, eyes red but alert. On the other side, her father's suit was flawless, but his jaw was clenched so tight it trembled. His attorney whispered something to him, but he didn't look away from the girl. He hadn't blinked in over a minute. Judge Evelyn Ellis adjusted her glasses, studying the room with eyes that had seen everything: criminals cry, parents lie, children fracture like porcelain. But something about this case, this girl, made her lean forward just slightly, as if instinctively drawn closer. Then there was Moose, a golden retriever. Thick-coated and golden as the morning sun, sat patiently near the bench. He wore a navy vest marked with white block letters, "Therapy dog, do not disturb." His tail didn't wag. He didn't shift. He just watched, quietly, carefully, like he knew what was coming before anyone else did. The court transcript would later reflect that Moose entered with Sienna under special approval from her trauma counselor. It would list legal terms like nonverbal testimony and trauma response protocol. But it wouldn't capture what really mattered: the way Sienna hadn't even made eye contact with another human in over 6 months. But she'd slept with one hand resting on Moose's paw every single night. The silence in the room was aching now, not just empty but weighted, until Judge Ellis spoke. "Sienna," she said gently, leaning forward, "you don't have to speak today unless you want to. You can nod. You can shake your head. Or—" She paused, then added with uncharacteristic softness, "you can use Moose, if you need to." Sienna didn't move. Not a twitch, not a blink. But Moose did. His ears perked. Then slowly, Sienna's right hand, small, pale, trembling, rose and touched her chest. Once, then again. Moose responded immediately. He stood calmly and with purpose, and took 3 steady steps toward her. The room held still as he reached her side and sat facing the court. And then, without a word, Sienna gave one more sign. A small gesture, almost invisible. A loop in the air with her finger, then a tap to Moose's back. And Moose barked, just once. A single clear sound that echoed louder than any testimony ever had. The attorneys froze. Sienna's mother gasped. The judge lowered her pen. And the courtroom, once suffocating in silence, now held something else. A truth no one could ignore. 2 years earlier, Sienna had been the kind of child who filled rooms with color. She would hum to herself while building Lego castles, talk to squirrels in the backyard, and insist on reading bedtime stories out loud, voices and all. Her laugh was quick and contagious, like the spark of a match in a dark hallway. But all of that had disappeared on a gray November evening. The kind of evening when even the sky seemed tired. Her parents had been fighting again this time, not in whispers, but in sharp, crashing words that rattled the plates in the cupboard. Sienna had crept out from behind her bedroom door when the yelling stopped suddenly. And then came the silence, the dangerous kind. She remembered stepping into the hallway, holding her stuffed rabbit by the ear and asking one simple question. "Mommy, are you okay?" She never got an answer. What she did get was a glare, one filled with so much fury, so much sudden heat, it burned through her memory like fire on paper. Her father had turned. His voice cracked like thunder. He grabbed her arm, not gently, not like a father. The next thing she remembered was lying on the carpet, the side of her face stinging her rabbit across the room. And then came the darkness, not of unconsciousness, but of fear. The kind of fear that taught her that words were not weapons, but invitations for pain. Sienna never spoke again. Not that night. Not the day after. Not the month after that either. Therapists were called. Some said it was trauma-induced mutism. Others used phrases like selective silence and emotional shutdown. Her mother cried every night in the kitchen. Her father said it was an act, that she was being manipulative. But Sienna, she wasn't acting. She was retreating, as if the very sound of her own voice had betrayed her. Every night she curled under the covers with her stuffed rabbit pulled tight against her chest, her eyes open long after midnight, afraid that the sound of breathing might wake the rage in the next room. Then came the day the therapist, Dr. Ramos, brought Moose. She didn't introduce him like a hero. She didn't call him special or magic or healing. She simply said, "This is Moose. He doesn't care if you talk. He just likes being near someone quiet." Moose was big, but not intimidating. His eyes were warm, the kind of brown that made you think of cinnamon and old trees. He walked into the therapy room and sat. That was all. No tricks, no barking, no wagging for attention. He just sat. Sienna didn't even look at him at first. She stared at the corner of the carpet like it might disappear. But Moose didn't move, not for 20 full minutes. And then when it was time to leave, something odd happened. Moose got up, walked to her side, and nudged her hand with his nose. Just once. Sienna flinched at first, but she didn't pull away. By the 4th session, she was sitting on the rug beside him, still not speaking, but her hand rested on his fur. By the 8th, she was drawing pictures of Moose, and by the 12th, she had begun to develop a silent language. It was Dr. Ramos who encouraged it. "Let her show you when she's ready," she'd told Sienna's mother gently. "Words don't always come first. Sometimes connection comes first." They started with signals. A tap on Moose's paw meant "I'm okay." A hand to her chest meant "I feel scared." A circle in the air meant "Ask Moose." Moose, for his part, learned them all. Whether by training or pure instinct, no one could quite say. But he responded with a patience no human could imitate. And slowly, bit by bit, Sienna re-entered the world. Not with conversation, but with connection. She didn't laugh yet. She didn't sing. But she would smile softly when Moose rolled onto his back and showed his belly. She would draw again sometimes little stories of a golden dog and a girl who hid behind clouds. Other times, pictures too sharp for her age to draw a man with a twisted face, a girl curled under a table. Her mother kept those drawings hidden in a folder in her closet, not as evidence, as memory, proof that her daughter was still in there, somewhere. By the time the custody case finally landed on Judge Ellis's desk, Sienna's story had already passed through dozens of hands. Social workers, counselors, attorneys, evaluators. But none of them could reach her. Not really. Until today. Until this moment in the courtroom when Moose had barked once and the world shifted. Because it wasn't just a sound. It was a translation. It was Sienna saying in her own way, "This is the truth. This is what happened. And I'm not afraid to show you anymore." The single bark still echoed in the corners of the courtroom. Judge Ellis blinked, lips slightly parted. She hadn't moved since Moose sounded off, not a rustle of her robe, not the scratch of a pen. Sienna sat completely still on the witness stand, her small hand frozen in the air just above Moose's golden head. She didn't look at anyone, not the judge, not her father, not even her mother, only Moose. Across the aisle, Sienna's father shifted in his chair, his arms crossed. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. Then louder, "You can't just let a dog testify in court." His voice cracked the silence like ice underfoot. Judge Ellis didn't flinch. "I don't see a dog testifying," she said without looking at him. "I see a child communicating, and I suggest you let her finish." There was something in her voice measured but heavy. It stopped the man cold. Sienna's therapist, Dr. Ramos, rose from her seat in the gallery. She held something small in her hands. Her face was pale, like she'd been holding her breath since they walked in. She approached slowly. I wasn't sure if this moment would happen," she said softly. "But Sienna gave me this 3 days ago just in case." Judge Ellis raised an eyebrow. "And what is it, Doctor?" Ramos gently extended a folded sheet of construction paper, pale yellow, slightly crinkled at the edges. The judge reached forward, carefully unfolding it. Inside was a drawing. It was done in colored pencil, soft and childlike, but heartbreakingly vivid. A small girl crouched in the corner of a bedroom, her arms wrapped tightly around her head. Across the room, a towering man stood with his fists clenched, his face contorted in red scribbles of anger unmistakable, even in crayon. A toppled lamp, a stuffed rabbit on the floor, and in the middle of it all, Moose. His golden form stood protectively between the girl and the man. His mouth open in mid-bark, his body tense. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a confession, a memory, a message from a child who couldn't speak, but desperately needed to be heard. On the back of the page, written in uneven block letters, "I don't feel safe when he's near," Moose remembers. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sienna's mother covered her mouth with both hands, her shoulders trembling with silent sobs. Sienna's father surged to his feet, knocking his chair over. "She's manipulating all of you," he shouted. "She's been coached. This is insane." Moose didn't move, but Sienna did. Slowly, quietly, she reached out her hand and laid it on Moose's back. Her fingers curled into his fur. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. And that simple gesture, silent, steady, was louder than the man's entire outburst. The bailiff took a step forward, but Judge Ellis raised a hand. Her eyes locked on Sienna's father. "Sit down," she said, and her voice didn't rise. It dropped calm and sharp like a blade. He hesitated, then obeyed. The courtroom was silent again, thicker this time, weighted not just by the truth, but by what it meant. Judge Ellis looked down at the drawing again. She took a breath, slow and deliberate. "In my 22 years on the bench," she said, "I've read psychological reports, seen video testimonies, and heard from every kind of expert. But nothing." Her voice faltered just slightly. "Nothing has ever looked at me like this piece of paper." She folded it carefully, as if it might tear from the weight of the moment. Then she looked to Sienna, and something inside her seemed to shift, something behind the stern glasses and ironed robe. She leaned forward. "Sienna," she said gently, "you don't have to say anything. I promise you that. But if there's anything you want to tell me, I'm listening. And no one will hurt you. Not here." Moose's ears twitched. Sienna blinked once. Then her lips parted. At first, no one was sure if it was real. Her voice was so soft it barely stirred the air. "But then Moose knows," she whispered. "He saw everything. When I couldn't speak." The words hung there, small, unshaken, real. Her mother let out a breath that sounded like a sob and a prayer all at once. Sienna didn't stop. "I tried to tell people before," she said, her voice no louder than a page turning. "But my dad said if I told anyone, he'd take Moose away." Judge Ellis's expression cracked, just for a moment. She folded her hands, composing herself, and spoke quietly. "No one," she said, "is taking Moose away. Not now. Not ever." Sienna exhaled, and something in her shoulders released. Not entirely, but enough. Enough to let her body lean just slightly toward Moose's warmth. The courtroom sat in stunned stillness. Even the court reporter fingers paused mid-air, hadn't typed for minutes. Moose stayed rooted at Sienna's side, unmoving. But his tail thumped just once on the wooden floor. A heartbeat. A thank you. A promise. Judge Ellis didn't reach for the gavel. Not right away. She simply looked at Sienna. Really looked. As if every second she could offer that girl was more important than a dozen other cases waiting outside her chambers. Then finally, softly, she spoke. "This court grants full legal and physical custody of Sienna Rose Callahan to her mother, effective immediately." There was no applause. No dramatic banging of the gavel. Only a quiet, collective exhale, as if the whole room had been holding its breath for 2 years. And finally let go. Sienna's father started to rise again, but the bailiff's hand rested on his shoulder. He didn't resist this time. He didn't speak. His eyes didn't meet his daughter's. He just sat, still, cold, alone. Sienna didn't look back at him, not out of fear anymore, but because he was no longer someone worth looking at. Moose leaned into her side again, his head brushing her elbow. Judge Ellis rose from her bench, gathering her files slowly. But just before leaving, she turned back once more and spoke not as a judge, but as a woman, as a human being. "Sienna," she said, her voice quiet but steady, You may not have used many words today, but you've said more than most people ever do. Thank you for trusting us." Then she nodded once softly and stepped through the judge's door. And just like that, it was over. But healing had only just begun. 6 months later, the seasons had shifted. Snow had melted into soft green grass, and the Vermont spring painted the trees in new colors. In a quiet public park just 2 blocks from their new apartment, a little girl sat beneath an oak tree with a sketchbook on her lap. Sienna, smiling, drawing. Moose lay beside her, his body stretched out in the sun, eyes half-lidded, tail twitching lazily. He didn't need to be alert all the time anymore. Not with the new world Sienna was building around her. She hadn't become chatty. That wasn't her nature. But she spoke now when she wanted to. She laughed. Not all the time, but enough to remind the world that she was still here. She still tapped her chest when she was nervous. She still made circles in the air when something felt too big to say out loud. But Moose always understood, and so did her mother. Sometimes at night, Sienna would crawl into bed and whisper secrets into Moose's ear. Soft, barely there words like, "Thank you," or "Stay," or "You saved me." And Moose, true to who he was, would just lean into her touch, curl up at her feet, and guard her while she dreamed. One afternoon, a little boy from the playground approached cautiously. "Can I pet your dog?" he asked, his hands sticky with popsicle juice. Sienna looked up surprised. She hesitated, just a flicker. Then she set her pencil down, tapped her chest, and gave Moose a gentle nod. Moose barked once softly and wagged his tail. The boy giggled and reached out, patting Moose's head with both hands. Sienna laughed too. A real round laugh that bubbled up from somewhere safe and warm. That moment was small. But for anyone who had ever known her story, it meant the world. It meant she was healing. It meant the bridge that Moose had built between silence and truth had held strong. And for the first time in a long time, Sienna wasn't just surviving, she was living. If this story moved you the way it moved us, if you believe that every child deserves to feel safe, to be heard, and to be loved, then help us make more stories like this reach the world. Share this with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe for more true, powerful stories that shine a light on what matters. And if you've ever witnessed a quiet act of bravery, leave it in the comments. Someone out there needs to read it. Because sometimes the softest voice tells the loudest truth. And sometimes a single bark can save a life.